Hello, and welcome to today's live reading of Distant Heart Sounds, Nurse Morgan #1 by Kate MacInnis, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Morgan jerked the covers below her chin, held her breath, and listened while her eyes searched high and low for whatever woke her in the dark bedroom. Dresser with mirror, chest with TV on top, makeup table with chair, dirty clothes on the floor around the hamper, and her queen-sized bed were all in order. Nothing moved in the room. She rubbed her face with both hands, took another deep breath, and exhaled slowly. Her body ached from yet another fitful night of sleep. A foreign sound in the distance made her turn left toward the window. She sat up, tilted her head, and listened with her eyes closed. It was faint and sounded like piano music. Again, she glanced around and did not see any movement or source of the sound. The music got louder, definitely a piano with a tinny tinkling quality. She slid out of bed and went to the closed window. She pulled the frilly curtains aside and looked across the blue-collar neighborhood in which she had lived for nearly 5 years. She unlocked the window, opened it, and stuck her head out. The only sound was the steady hum of early morning traffic a few blocks away. Lights were on from early risers in the other small houses, who also started their workday before daylight. Morgan occasionally recognized some of them as they toiled away in their yards and homes every night and all weekend. The stillness of the night felt cool and safe just as the music suddenly blasted. Vibrating the window, Morgan stepped back, closed it, and turned the lock. Piano music swelled again and shook the walls while someone inside the house laughed as a champagne cork popped. Morgan crossed the room and grabbed the baseball bat from her bedroom closet and placed it on her shoulder in a batter up gesture. She stepped into the dark hall outside the bedroom, where a glow from the first floor of the house gave off enough light to flood the stairs. She frowned at the intense smell of freshly baked bread and rich food that made her mouth water, since she could neither cook nor bake. At the top of the staircase, she crouched with her back against the wall and planted one bare foot on the first step as she leaned closer to the banister. With the bat now cradled in her lap, she peered downstairs. In the foyer below, she counted more than 30 people gathered in the entry, library, and living room of her small home. She was sure she didn't even know that many people. The lights blazed as the revelers laughed, ate hors d'oeuvres from silver platters, smoked cigarettes, stood around the shiny black piano as they sang Cole Porter tunes, and clinked champagne glasses filled to the brim. Several people made toasts for good luck and great health. One gentleman spilled the bubbly liquid with a flourish onto the shiny marble floor as he tried to hit the target of another gentleman who lay there with his mouth wide open. A few couples snuggled into corners while others danced, shimmied, and vied for attention. Everyone was dressed in black and white silks and satins with dazzling jewels and long strings of pearls. "I don't own a piano," Morgan said out loud, "and my house doesn't have marble floors." The piano player stopped and looked up at her with widened eyes. His mouth opened and a loud pop shook the house. Every light went out on the first floor. Morgan clutched the bat to her chest and felt her heart hammer in her ribs. She leaned back and felt over her head for the hall light switch. She flipped it, and the illumination revealed no people, no party streamers, no wet floor, no dirty dishes, and no piano. She stared at the empty sight for a moment, stood, and edged her way back to the bedroom. Morgan sagged on the side of the bed. Sweat broke out on her forehead and upper lip. Her head pounded as hot tears scorched her eyes. The scar on her scalp from the brain surgery performed a few weeks earlier throbbed. She rubbed the spot and stretched her neck. Back to work for only 3 days as an emergency center charge nurse at the Metro Detroit Hospital, Morgan survived a ruptured aneurysm deep in her brain 6 weeks earlier. She was fortunate to still be alive. The blowout was fixed without residual damage. At least that's what the doctor said. Morgan believed something happened on the operating table while she was under sedation. She remembered a visit with her from her mother, father, and sister, all of whom had passed away years before. There was also a handsome couple who hovered in the background, neither of whom she recognized. The only logical explanation was a near-death experience while under anesthesia. She asked the neurosurgeon about the incident, but he dismissed her. She decided not to share this information with anyone else. Morgan struggled to breathe normally while her heart thudded. She turned off the alarm at 4:30 a.m. and counted to 10, slowly, over and over as she rocked herself to and fro on the edge of the bed. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached for her cell, looked at it, and put it back on the bedside table. She choked on a sob, wiped her face with the bedsheet, and looked around. Douglas, she called, where are you? The white English bulldog came in from the hallway and scampered over to her. Morgan scratched his head. Did you sleep through the party at our house? Did you see any of the people who were here? Some guard dog you are. I'm sure if they offered you cookies, you'd try to stay awake and keep an eye on them. Douglas looked at her with soulful eyes and sniffed her hand as she reached for him. He pulled his head back and stared at her again. She helped him onto the bed and watched him get his balance. Douglas walked around, cuddled into the pillows, and snored within seconds. You know, Douglas, if these party people are ghosts or a figment of my imagination, at least they know how to have a good time. Like, I like that in a hallucination. She nodded and looked around the room. Everything was in its proper place. Morgan got out of bed and gathered clean clothes, then turned to glance at the clock on her way to the bathroom. It was early to be up as she stood in the center of the room and stared at the enormous antique clawfoot bathtub that was original to the house. As a nurse, many of Morgan's workdays were filled with blood, guts, pain, and heartache. She had spent hours in here soaking away the tension. She moved on to the separate glass shower that she added when she moved in. After her shower, Morgan dressed in fresh scrubs and hurried downstairs to the kitchen with Douglas close on her heels. The sunny, yellow kitchen was at the back of the house with large windows on two adjoining walls that overlooked the backyard and the neighbor's house to the right. Much of the room was the original 1940s layout with new cabinets and appliances added when she bought the place. The kitchen sink was centered under the largest window for a full view of Douglas when he was outside. The door in the center of the back wall opened directly onto the porch with a couple of steps down to the fenced backyard. The dining room was also at the back of the house on the opposite side across from the kitchen. Same window positions as the kitchen, but one overlooked the neighbor's house on the left. An empty, built-in corner china cabinet stood erect like a hollow sentinel between the windows. Douglas raced outside and Morgan left the back door open for him. She searched the refrigerator and found no edible food for herself. However, she did see 2 bottles of liquor, one rosé and the other a cherry vodka that had chilled to perfection months before. She reached for one of the bottles, stopped short, and closed the fridge. She opened the pantry next to the outside door and grabbed a few peanut butter cracker snacks that could sustain her throughout the day. Douglas came back into the house and looked at his bowl of food, clearly not impressed that it was the same old fare. He shot her a dirty look, as bulldogs often do, and scampered upstairs. She grabbed her purse and keys, locked up the house, and got into the car. The Jeep Wrangler growled to life immediately. Although early spring, it was still cold enough to have the heated seats and steering wheel activated. Morgan sighed as she felt the warmth. She pulled out of the driveway and drove along the quiet street for 3 blocks before she turned south on the infamous Woodward Avenue, known for being the first paved road in America. She pressed the accelerator and within minutes joined the early rush hour traffic. A song from World War II played on the car radio. She changed the channel and the same song played. She touched another button to switch stations, but the same song played again. Morgan shivered and cranked the heat up to 75 degrees. The music played all the way to the local coffee shop where she pulled in and parked. Inside the store, the baristas and customers moved along at a normal pace. Morgan felt as though she was in shock and forced to move through thick gelatin with every step, a colossal effort. She stood in line to order and rubbed the center of her breastbone where she felt a twinge deep inside her chest. Panic washed over her. The party at her house and the same song in every station of the radio were as real as the hair on her head. She knew in an instant from that day forward her life would never be the same, and these experiences would continue. Morgan got her chai latte and a black coffee for her boss, then hurried back to the Jeep. She made the 10-minute trip to the hospital with the radio turned off. She pulled into the parking deck and hustled to the emergency center entrance as she balanced the tea, coffee, and her canvas bag stuffed with a change of street clothes and shoes. She powered through the pneumatic doors and didn't stop until she reached the whiteboard behind the main nurse's station that showed the cases currently in examination rooms. The EC itself was well lit and the odors were distinct. There was a familiar eau de penicillin combined with the metallic smell of blood intertwined with dabs of chlorine bleach. The aroma triggered the adrenaline to pump all the way to her fingertips as she stopped and counted the number of cases pending on the whiteboard. It was a good day, as only half of the 50 patient rooms were filled. Morgan looked up at the huge clock over the nurse's desk, which was the hub of the center. The EC was a large Roman numeral 2 with 2 long halls, each with 25 total examination and trauma rooms. The back hall was the bottom of the 2, and another hall across the top was the front hall or entrance. The main nursing deck was anchored from the front hall, positioned to prevent patients and visitors from entering in the treatment area. It had 3 computers, one for the desk clerk in the center and one at each end of the counter for staff. A waiting room off to the side of the desk was available for the public to use while they waited. This morning, some visitors paced while others texted or dozed. One child cried and asked for his mommy. His father held him close and looked exhausted and scared at the same time as he paced around the room. A huge flat screen television with muted sound was mounted in the corner and set on a news channel. Its remote was locked away from sight to avoid conflicts. A bank of elevators stationed next to the waiting room was in constant use. The pneumatic doors to the hallway connected to the EC to the rest of the hospital. Behind the nurse's desk was a small kitchen that adjoined a slightly larger room with a few ancient magazines, rectangular table with plastic chairs, and several storage lockers with broken locks. This room was used for employee meals or just to get away for a few minutes. Morgan went into the break room, put the coffee on the table and the rest of her stuff in the closest locker before she went back to look at the patient list again on the whiteboard. She held her hot tea in both hands as she read the board. Morgan, flies are going to nest in your precious mouth if you continue to stand there with it wide open, Savannah Holt, MD, said as she came from behind. I've seen every one of the patients and most are still here waiting for consults. Actually, it's a pretty tame bunch today. Morgan nodded and watched Savannah stifle a yawn. There's a semi-hot coffee for you on the table. Well, aren't you the sweetest thing? Savannah hurried to retrieve the coffee and came back. You look pale and washed out, Morgan. Are you sure you're ready to be back to work? Tiffany called and she'll be late, which means you have to handle the desk, phones, and public. She had personal business to take care of before work. Savvy went to the whiteboard and erased a name. That patient went home an hour ago. No need to keep her listed up here. Her discharge papers should be around here someplace. I told the resident to drop them on the desk. Morgan nodded as she sat in Tiffany's chair and placed her tea on the desk. I don't like it when Tiff isn't here, Morgan said. I'm not nearly as organized as she is. We'll manage, and by will manage, I mean that you will, Savannah laughed. Morgan narrowed her eyes at her boss, who moved behind Morgan's chair. You know that if you need more time off to heal, you can tell me. I would take the maximum amount of time needed to protect my health if it were me. Oh, as if you would ever leave the EC for more than 48 hours. Honestly, Savannah, this place is the child you never had. This is your weird and perverted little baby. You seemed in a daze a few minutes ago, and now you're all uber efficient. I've known you for 20 years, and I sense that you're not really your old sarcastic self. Tell me, Morgan, is there a problem? Don't give me one of your wise ass remarks either. Just spit it out. Morgan turned to look directly at Savannah. I am different, Savvy. I've been through a lot, and at this point, I'm not even sure if I will ever be the same. She stiffened and rubbed her hands together. Look, Savvy, if at any time I can't do my job, you won't have to deal with it. I'll leave voluntarily. You won't even have to ask. She waited for Savvy's reaction, which was a simple nod. Savvy moved away from the desk and said over her shoulder, I will hold you to that promise, Morgan. Morgan nodded at Savannah's back and got to work. Reading through the stacks of orders, notes, and lab results left by the previous shifts, she wiped hot tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand as she looked around for a tissue. She found the box, grabbed one, and continued sorting another stack of paper. She had already answered the phone several times when she noticed a photo tacked to the small bulletin board between the top of the desk and counter. Morgan smiled as she unpinned the picture taken at last year's office Christmas party held at her house. So much had happened since then. The picture was a group shot of her coworkers with Tiffany at the center, easy to spot with her burgundy hair and goth lipstick. The memory of the party triggered a sense of peace to wash over Morgan. She loved her home. It was her safe place, although it was currently threatened by unknown visitors who partied in the middle of the night. So far, they hadn't done anything to hurt or threaten her in any way, so maybe they would go away altogether if she ignored them. She kissed her finger and tapped the picture before putting it back on the wall behind the phone. The multi-line phone rang often, and she answered questions as fast as she could. As the remainder of the day shift staff arrived, they greeted her and asked about the missing Tiffany. She shared that Tiffany would be late as they were interrupted by the phone. When she was again alone at the desk, she let out a sigh before a rich guttural moan exploded right behind her ear, causing her to duck. The noise swelled and broke apart into a collection of agonized voices in the open area in front of the desk. Some cried in high pitches as others keened in deep tones. She stiffened at the screams of small children, sweat breaking out on her head and chest. Does anyone else hear that noise? Morgan asked the nurses who returned to the desk from the first rounds on patients. What noise? One of the nurses replied. Probably the pipes again. This area of the hospital is really old, said another. The EC was part of the original hospital when it opened in the 1920s and still had the original shiny pale green subway tiles accented with smooth, pale yellow brick. Over the years, more rooms were added, but still there were not enough. When all the rooms were filled, carts were parked on both sides of the halls to accommodate the overflow of patients. Morgan nodded and rolled back in the chair to face the nurse's desk. The stench of burnt wires overwhelmed the area. She coughed at the acrid smell and checked for a similar reaction from the others. No one else seemed to notice. Again, she gagged right when Ellen Garcia, one of her best friends, came behind the desk. Hey, charge nurse, how are you? Did I just hear you gag on something? Ellen moved closer to Morgan and patted her back. Ellen was small and wiry with curly dark brown hair and huge brown eyes. I'm fine, Ellen, thanks. How are you? I'm fit and ready for duty this fine day. I sure did miss you here, just like everybody else did. Truthfully, I missed your sense of humor the most. It's so needed in the EC. Hey, it sounded like you were about to cough up a lung. You sure you're okay? Yeah, I gagged on my cold tea. Morgan held up the empty cup from earlier. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you take a drink. Sure glad to have you back, though. Wait, Ellen, have you noticed an odd smell around here? Nope, what did you have in mind? Ellen asked, grabbing the computer on wheels and pointing it toward the hall on the right. I don't know, like a burnt hair dryer or an overheated toaster? Ellen shook her head, and not wanting to be scolded by Savannah, she hurried away when she saw her boss heading to the desk. It was a rule that nurses shouldn't spend time talking when there were patients to care for, unless the conversation was specifically about a patient. I don't want you here if you aren't well, Morgan, not only for the safety of my patients, but for your own good. Savannah inhaled and let it out slowly. In a more relaxed voice, she continued, Morgan, I overheard you say something about smells. Did you know that a head injury can cause your nose to be out of whack and your sense of smell can't work right? Yes, I've heard about that, Morgan answered as a bright emerald light appeared all around Savannah. Just make sure you can handle yourself, Savvy replied. Morgan watched as the light vibrated in rhythm with the doctor's speech pattern. At almost 6 feet tall, Savannah Holt was a striking woman with blonde hair and flawless porcelain skin. Morgan had heard of auras before, but had never experienced seeing one. She immediately had to do some research and see if this ability is also related to her surgery. She smiled, thinking the aura was a nice touch to accent Savvy's green eyes. I'm fine, really, Dr. Holt, but I would like to get out of this chair for a while. Morgan stood and patted Savannah's arm as she looked carefully at the light around the doctor. Honestly, Savvy, trust me. Morgan shivered as she walked away from the desk and down the hall to the examination rooms. She turned around and said, Hey, Savvy, how's your mom these days? Savannah stiffened at the comment and sat down hard in Tiffany's chair. Her emerald green glow now displayed never-ending bright yellow lightning bolts emanating from its core. Morgan watched and mumbled, I bet it's a safe bet those bolts aren't a positive sign. She glanced around the EC, but didn't see any other visible auras on the nurses, aides, lab techs, residents, visitors, or patients. Morgan crossed her arms over her chest as she continued down the hall. A loud knock, followed by moans and cries, rang throughout the EC. It started at one end of the hall and thundered through the entire length. Morgan paced as she held her hands over her ears to block the sounds. She stopped abruptly when a storage closet door opened by itself and the soft light beckoned to her. Without a second thought, she scooted inside and leaned against a shelf where she could still hear the deafening sounds that vibrated the floors and walls. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, she said out loud and stopped. Damn it, I can't think of the next line of that prayer. Her heart skittered and banged in her chest as she held her head down to concentrate. She repeated the line from the prayer several times, but could not remember the next word. She closed her eyes. I swear I will brush up on my prayers the first chance I get. After a few minutes in the closet, Morgan cracked the door open and peeked up and down the hall. Savannah was nowhere in sight, and all was quiet. She slinked out, straightened her back, and walked remarkably close to the wall all the way down the hall. I am strong and I am not a victim. I can handle this, Morgan repeated to herself on the way to the nurse's station. When she arrived, no one was at the desk. Savvy left it unattended. The phone rang, unanswered, and more papers were in a pile. She sat immediately and answered the phone. Within seconds, Ellen was at the desk answering another line. When Morgan hung up, another rang. Both women took the calls for a few minutes until the telephone settled down. First few days back are rough, aren't they? Ellen asked as she rolled her chair closer to Morgan. At what time is Tiffany supposed to be here? I'm sure she'll be in soon. With Tiffany, that could mean she volunteered to feed the homeless or had to appear in court for the commission of a felony. You can't tell with her, said Ellen. Morgan nodded as several lines of the phone lit up again. She stared at the phone until Ellen jumped in to help. She continued sorting orders and answering lines until it went quiet again. You know, Ellen, I'm a little bit rusty. I was home for longer than I thought. Before Ellen could comment, from the other end of the desk, EC physician Ted Kelly, MD, snapped, The patient in room 2 needs help to the bathroom. Relieved and eager for a distraction from the chaos of the phone, Morgan got up and walked quickly down the hall toward room 2.